Okay, so we're officially starting. This is week one of the Reading for Writers book club. And so what we're doing is we're examining a book that's due. We'll have various criteria. So in this case, we've chosen or a fantasy book, and the reason it was selected was that it was self-published and then selected for publication by a traditional publisher. So there's lots of people would see that as a sign of success. So that the book came out, it was doing so well that someone else wanted to invest in it. So for that reason, I thought, wow, this would be really cool to study this book. The other reason for selecting this book was that he's fairly local to me. And so I thought there's a chance that that I could get a message to him and he can come out to one of these meetings. I've sent a message to him by IG and and through his website, and I haven't heard back anything yet, but I'm hopeful that he'll join us for one of these sessions so we can get even more information about his book and the things that went well for him. And oh, sorry, I'm distracted because my son is coughing up a lung. My gosh, poor guy. But anyway, and the other reason for selecting this book is that I'm going to read a bit about his author profile, and this was what attracted to me as well. Let me find it. So the author, Evan Winters, was born in England to South American parents. He was raised in Africa near the historical territory of his, I think you say Xhosa ancestors. Evan has always loved fantasy novels, but when his son was born, he realized that there weren't many epic fantasy novels featuring characters who look like him. So before he ran out of time, he started writing them. So this story is on the back of it. It says Game of Thrones meets Gladiators. And so the other thing is that it meets Gladiators and Game of Thrones, but the history it's drawing for is African history. And so it uses some of the myths like the demon world and all this from African mythology, and that the characters are mostly Black characters. So that was all a great reason to try this, to try this book, to introduce people perhaps who hadn't read science fiction with a different kind of background mythology. And those were the reasons for selecting this. And so in week one, as described I created this lovely Eventbrite invitation. So I'm going to share my screen just so we can look at that for a second. And that's our agenda for let me get rid of this bit. This is our agenda for the next couple of weeks. So it's a 4-week type of series on Wednesdays. And we're going to look in this week at the product itself, learning more about or talking about writing an editorial process. And just kind of, I've done a study on this to kind of see what went really well for him and why this book in particular is successful, and what we can take to our own work from that. In week 2, we're going to talk more about the publishing process. This book was self-published and then it was traditionally published. So we'll just talk a bit about what that means and why it was, and let's see what else I wrote. So Evan developed a fantastic story. And so we'll talk about the importance of networking and building relationships with industry professionals, as well as the role of agents and literary agencies in creating more success for your book. And we'll talk about how to get success for your book if it's self-published, and why he might have taken on that kind of a contract. And week 3, we're really going to look at marketing and promotion strategies that Evan used. We're going to look at his author platform, examine how he connected with his readers in particular. So how did he create a buzz around his book? What aspects of his author platform and marketing can we apply to our own projects? We'll look and discuss social media marketing, book signings, reviews and endorsements, and book launchings. See what he did, and then we'll see what he applied to us. Very cool, eh, Scott? And then in week 4, which spills at that'll be our last session, and it'll be the 5th of April. We're going to look at the overall success and reception of the book and really look at what we think resonated with readers and what made it stand out in the crowded book market. And so how can we do the same? What lessons can we take from what he did to our own writing? So I'll stop the share now, and so then we can talk a bit more about this. Let me just move into my little slide. I made a few slides to help me along the way. Oh, I had this one. Isn't that cute? Because we are talking about books. And so, so this cute graphic shows like, these are all of our books flapping about, and we want them to resonate and land lots of readers. It's like, choose me, choose me, choose me. Why do people select books? And why in particular did they select this one? So today's agenda, what makes a book good? So it doesn't matter. Oh, let's see if I can actually show this. I should have put a picture up. Next time I will. But this is Evan Winter's book. Look how gorgeous this cover is, for one thing. Look, let's see if I can get, so you can see, look at the width. I got my finger where I am. I should just get myself a little bookmark so I don't lose my place. I will use this. So I haven't finished, but I am now at that spot where you can't put it down. And of course on the back he's got tons of reviews. How do you make this? Oh, right, you can see it. You just put it right over your body. He's got tons of reviews. So what makes a book good? And this often depends on the genre. So what's good for a romance book won't necessarily be the type of things that you're looking for in a fantasy book, which won't be what you're looking in a kid's book. So obviously, I think it's obvious that the type of book you're looking for has different rules that the reader expects, and that's what draws them into the story. So for example, in a fantasy book, and what we get here is a chunky story. Yeah, it's chunky. You don't expect a thin fantasy book. Like when you look at, Harry Potter, yes, the first book was, she had to restrain herself. But then as soon as she gained success, she could release. This, I guess, isn't typical for the size of a first book picked up by a traditional publisher. But of course, he was self-published, so he could do what he wanted. This book is around, let's see, oh, I'll show you some of the features it has at the end in a minute. This is 523 pages of fun. Okay, 523 pages. Like a lot of fantasy books, you've got to get into it at first because you've got a new whole world. Like he has different greetings. The climate is different. I mean, in this book, it's always hot because it is set in an African type of situation. And he draws that in, that making sure that people aren't fighting. They know that if they're going to be fighting in the heat of the midday, that they have to take different precautions. And you see that as part of his plot. So you really see how his world is part of the action. This, what are the other differences? They have different, like the people and the types of names of the ruling classes and the different statuses of people. So for example, he has the lessers and the nobles. Often in fantasy, you have that kind of class division. And Linda, who isn't here today, in her book, she has a version of the lessers and the nobles. You find that a lot in fantasy. And so when you have that, that there's going to be some commentary on like what the author thinks is fair and kind of stuff. And I did find this line that I kind of think is, did I remember to mark that? I usually don't mark my books, but now that as I realize I never give my books away. So they're mine and I don't know why I have to keep them, pristine. So now I do things like I'm going to fold the page over when I want to, just to mark if there's something I want to share with you and stuff like that. But you know, the theme, like these kind of things, the underlying story of the author's voice comes through, right? And in this case, he's got real big difference between the lessers and the nobles that are a big part of how our hero, whose name is Tau, Tau, ends up having a destiny that's so different from the life he thought he wanted. So in the beginning of the book, we have this boy. He lives with his dad. His mom and his parents are separated or divorced. Actually, his mom's remarried. They're in peacetime, and then things change. Because there's no story if nothing changes. If because that's always where a story starts, where something out of the ordinary happens that changes what would have what would have been the normal course of events without some big event. And in this case, we start out with the prologue of the chosen people finding a new home. I can't remember if it tells us why they needed a new home, but they find a new home and then they have to keep defending it. That's so common in our world too. There's places where, like for example, with Israel, where they found a new home and they're always having to defend it. So in this story, that actually they also consider themselves the chosen people. And so they've got a pocket, and the people who they've displaced don't want them there. And so that's why there's a continual war, why they need soldiers, and why Tau has a role in the first place. So that's how that's how it starts up. In the beginning, I found it really difficult, as I found in fantasy, to keep track of the many names of the different social strata, the names of their gods and stuff like that. But you know, uh, different authors have different ways of introducing that, or keeping you or like they might. He didn't choose to keep it simple. Like sometimes in some books I've seen where, you get what you need and it comes out in drips and drabs, but it's like in this one, you're full on in this world and you're thinking, what the hell is let me think, read some of these words. We have petty nobles. We have, what other, oh, this is chapter 1. We have the gifted, we have ruling councils, we have a dragon queen, we have monsters, we have, let's see, we have different styles of fighting, different weapons, the Hedini, what's a Nkosi, all these types of questions. You think, what on earth? Eventually, and that can prevent you from getting into the story. But usually it takes, especially in a book like this, how many I'm going to put that question out to you, like how many pages you give yourself before you think, I'm going to give up on this. Like for me, I'll keep going if there's something, but it is hard. And I know, Scott, you were saying as well that you had trouble getting into the story. Did you?
At first, yeah, because it was so bloody in the prologue. And I'm like, I don't want that kind of, I don't know how to express it, but yeah, I mean, yes, there's desperate fighting, and that's not what the problem. It's the sort of the lack of humanity almost that sometimes you can end up with, even if it's, I mean, sometimes that's part of it and you have to get by it, but I'm gradually getting into it now.
Yes, I found that as well, that he didn't shy away from describing the ways people died and the injuries. And I figured, and as I'm now in the middle of it, that it's probably part of his philosophy about war. That because he he doesn't gloss over it or make it pretty. And in the beginning, it's not that much of a spoiler, because it's common that characters have a viewpoint on what their destiny is supposed to be that changes. For example, Tao kills his first person in this first war, and he decides, no way, being a soldier is not for me. He is so traumatized by it that he thinks, I'm not going to follow along with the future that my father planned for me. His father was a great teacher, and he is a great teacher in the book, and part of the reason that Tao gets special lessons is because his father is such a great teacher. He gets to teach some of the noble families, and particularly this family who's the highest family in this area. And so he gets to train with them. So Tao makes a plan that he's going to fake an injury after he gets, after he gets some kind of, after he gets a certain rank, and then he enlists his friend who's of that ruling class so that he can do this. And he says to his friend, will you help me do this? Because he's seen someone else who they know faked an injury so that he could have a calm life with his girlfriend. And this is what Tao plans in the beginning, but things soon change. And his whole life is a different trajectory because, of course, without a real massive change, you get no story. And the whole thing about stories, like when we talk about characterization, is that characters start in one place, they are forced to change by some outside thing that happens, and then they become a different person. There has to be a change, like a change in the abilities and in the character and in the personality, everything, the strength, everything in a character for us to care enough about them. And so in this book, we certainly get that. And like I said, I'm in the bit where it's a page turner, because yes, it did take a while to get into it. But the other thing that people should look out for, and I will do this next time I'm in a fantasy book, because I read one by Sanderson. What's his name? Brandon Sanderson. And he is like one of the, it was a recommendation of Linda, who's a fantasy fan. And he, of course, his started, I think it was simpler to get into because it was very few characters. Although again, it was a war and this big promise that had to be fulfilled. In most fantasy books, and in this one, don't give up, look for their glossary. Oops. And this one has one. It has a glossary, and it also has another thing common in books that are this complex, a table describing the strata that I was having. Oh, I was having trouble to showing this to you. The chosen case or casts, I'm not sure how people, and there's a map somewhere too, I think, or maybe I confuse that with a map. Yeah, there isn't a map. I don't think it really needs a map so much because, but certainly this has what you expect in a fantasy book. It's big. There's lots of action. The action happens at a fast pace. There's strong characters, and that you end up falling in love. You want to see them succeed. That the world building is intense and believable, and that there's logic to it, and that it's different enough that you think, oh wow, this is so cool. And his is definitely a unique story. This one is the beginning of a series. So I'm looking forward to finishing this one, which let's see, I guess I started it about a week ago, maybe a bit longer. And of course, the first bit took longer, and now, wow, am I in it. What really surprises me, though, about my enjoyment of this book is that a lot of it is about his development as a soldier. And just like in Game of Thrones, where I never thought I would be interested in war scenes, I remember that one, I forget, was it the Battle of the Bastard? That was one of the episodes in the TV series of Game of Thrones. I read the books as well, but in that one, it's the whole hour and a half, I think, is battle scenes, and yet because of the way they're developed, it is more about the will and character of the leaders than it is about who hits who and how they hit. So for that reason, I'm really enjoying this, because along with Tao, you meet some other really fascinating people who at first hate him and then they coalesce. You know, I'm thinking also of a series that I've been watching on television where, yeah, they've got strong characters, but some of them are just so horrible. There's nothing interesting about them. To me, I don't know if anyone else has watched it, but a series called Your Honor, and it has Bryan Cranston who was in Breaking Bad, and then there's this character called Gina Baxter. It's the wife of the gangster, and she's just so ugly, like in character. Not, of course, the actress is beautiful, but there is just nothing interesting about the character. You just think the whole series would not suffer if they removed that character. Whereas in a good book, each character is there for a reason and drives the plot. And we certainly see this in this fantasy book. So I think this guy, he's got such accolades. Like, I think Time called this book one of the best fantasy. Let me find the reviews rather than me accidentally making up lies, or But here we have. Let's see who are the. Let's see. Okay. Yes, he's called a major new talent, and I know I was looking online, and Times Magazine said that he was one of the fantasy writers to watch. Can you imagine your first book coming out and being labeled in that way? He got from Kirkus, page turner, replete with demons, dragons, and really bad dreams. Fantasy fans will find this an absorbing, fast-paced table setter. And yeah, and that's certainly what you get. So before, we won't go into reviews because that's probably week 4 that we'll talk more about the value of reviews and where his reviews came from and all that. Because just as something of note, he has all these reviews on the back, and it says the people's name and their story, but it doesn't give us, like for example, we have Anna Stevens, author of Godblind, Anthony Ryan, author of Bloodsong, David Dalglish, author of the Shadow Dance series. We don't know if those are famous stories or they're written by you and I. And so on your book, why not on the cover do what he does and have lots of people tell others what they think of your book? Because you can't tell from those names whether they're best-selling authors or whether they're people who are aspiring or someone who's written just one book and sold 30 copies. You can't tell from that. And so, but we'll talk about that more in the future. But certainly there's lots of reasons why someone would pick up this book. And so let's talk now about how we can apply what is great about this book to ensure our own books are as good and can attract as many readers. So you need to have, if you're a fantasy book, a wieldy story, lots of action, fast-paced, strong characters, believable world building, and a unique story. But let's find, but do we always need that? Let me see what I wrote next. Yeah, so how does this apply to your writing? So yeah, let's talk about rules for other genres. For example, I'll start with, and we'll bring Scott in again. But like if your genre is romance, technically for romance, you have to have a happy ending. If it doesn't have a happy ending, it's not a classic romance. And so do you believe in rules? And then, what challenges are you having or do you foresee with creating a great product based on the type of things that made this one a great product? So I know that some people, they'll come and they'll think, oh, I have this great story, and it's in their head, and then they're struggling to actually get it down. So one of their challenges is actually the work of keeping their butt in the seat and keeping going, because they keep second guessing themselves as they're writing. And so they would struggle to get a book this thick, right? Especially if that was a demand of their genre. Often people will come because I, as an editor, come to me and they'll have a 20,000 word script, manuscript that I know that for the genre is we can easily build to 40,000 or 60,000, but when they come, they don't know. And they're thinking, oh no, how on earth did they get so many words in that? And does there have to be so many words in that? Like, there's another study that says, because with the self-publishing boom, especially in nonfiction and self-help books, that no one reads over 100 words, 100 pages. I mean, why have your book over 100 pages if no one's going to read it? Well, one reason might be that are you sure you're telling the whole story in that 100 pages? And so an editor can help to make sure, because like an editor, I always feel like an editor's job is the customer relations. So I'm looking at it from the customer's perspective. And I'm saying, and so I'll think, oh, do they have enough this? Do they have enough that in it? Like, or is this satisfying? Have you provided enough information to allow someone to enjoy the story? Hey, welcome, Linda. We're talking, as you know, about this book. I recorded this, and I think there's a lot of great stuff that you'll want to hear about this, because you didn't need to read this book, but there's so many similarities in this book to yours.
Oh, yeah?
Yes. Including a leader who that's not what he wanted, and he has to rise to the occasion for various reasons. A world, I'm just going to summarize a bit, of the stuff that I know, especially for you, because I really think you'll enjoy this book. Should you accept the challenge? It's a wheel. Look at the size of this book.
Yeah, it's a big one.
It's a big one, and as I was saying, it was tough to get into, but then when you were in it, you get into that, oh my gosh, and you're keeping up with the pace. It's hard to keep up with the pace. You don't want to put it down. I extend my bathroom breaks, as I admit, I have some of my favorite books right in the right by my throne. I admit it.
What's it
It's
called?
the only place as a mom you get any goddamn peace.
What is it called? The Rage of Dragons?
Yes, the Rage of Dragons. Sorry, the Rage of Dragons.
I'm just ordering it now.
Yeah, it's The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter.
Yeah.
Kids and pets follow me everywhere else, but I lock this. That's one door I lock, and I get.
I don't even have that. I don't even have that privacy. My cat and my dog feel the need to be with me at every moment.
Yeah, I let them scratch at the door. But yeah, and so I'm just going to go back a slide for just a second, because we were talking about what was wonderful about this book. It has everything you expect in a fantasy. And so now I'm so pleased you've arrived, because we're going to have a discussion about this. This is your genre, Linda. And so those are the rules. And we're talking about whether you believe in rules. We're talking about whether books have to be this big or whatever else. Because I was just saying that as an editor, often the challenge people see is that they'll look at a finished book, which is, sorry, just telling my sister, my sister knows when to call. She always makes an entrance. And so what happens, I have a do not disturb on it, but I allow family members to get through. I have to change that because of only my sister, because she knows when I'm presenting, and every presentation I do, my sister calls in the middle of it. So I'm going to have to block her. But that's quite a gift, I think. She always knows when I'm presenting. But anyway, one of the biggest challenges people foresee is having enough words in a book, or because they'll think, oh my gosh, how on earth did they have, as if that's but the thing is, if you're telling a story well, that will come. So, but it definitely does tend to be a challenge for people who are starting out when they think, or they get all tangled up in the various subplots, because a book like this, a book like yours, Linda, and the book like the ones you're writing after you finish your kids' book, Scott, they are going to have some tangly plots. And so these are some of the challenges. But let's I'm going to ask you a question then, Linda. So, like with your writing, and you're now on the second book,
Mhm.
what are the challenges that you have creating a book that you, because in order to sell it, you have to have a great product. So, what are there challenge? Oh, I know that you've switched over to another book outside of the series, and that's probably one of the ways that you're doing the challenges. But I guess my question is, what challenges do you have with writing your series?
Um, well, I think for the second book, it's just, just to remember everything about my characters. Like, and I do have spreadsheets where it's all written down and stuff, but just you want your characters to grow and you want them to have challenges, but you also have to make the plot interesting and the dialogue interesting, and try and end every chapter, which will make them want to turn to the next page because they can't wait to find out what happens, like kind of
Yeah.
cliffhangers.
Yeah, you want to create some insomniacs.
Yeah.
That's one of the
Well,
goals as a writer.
those books that I couldn't put down, that I had to read the whole thing before, I could go to bed, But I mean, some of those were impossible because I had books that were, this thick, and there's no way you could read it all in one day.
I read The Stand in less than a week, and that was
Really?
1,053 pages. And I know that because I couldn't believe that I read that book in a week, and I kept a full-time job. You'd think that in order to read that much, but oh my gosh, I guess I went to the washroom a lot. I don't know, but or maybe I expanded reading to outside of that. But wow, did I read that book quickly because I just couldn't put it down. So, but yeah, and I know that one of the challenges you had, oh, it's a bit of a uh, spoiler, but I know you had to create another world. We won't say why you had to create another
Yeah.
book for your second book.
Yeah.
But
So that was a challenge too, because then I had to, like, I actually went and got maps. I went to CAA and got maps of the area and stuff, and like, okay, what's in, like, there's a scene where my characters are in an old, what used to be the zoo. So I did research on how they have a zoo in Colorado Springs. So I did research on the real zoo to see what it would look like to make like, what if the new groups would meet.
mm.
That's where their base is, in an old zoo.
Oh, I have something that might be helpful to you, because I was doing the crossword the other day, and it said, what are typical fences in a zoo? And the answer was moats.
Moats?
Yeah. That more that like when you think about like how they separate the tigers and stuff, it isn't fences. It's like actually like created geographical dips and stuff like that so that the animals can't crawl out, even if there's so that might be something.
I think there was a tiger in St. Louis that got out of its enclosure twice in 1 week.
That's a smart tiger.
Yeah.
It's learning. So, but generally, fences, there's not real fences in zoos. There's these moats or things like that, different ways of enclosing animals. So maybe that'll help in terms of your fights. And I think of the Toronto Zoo, they have those buildings and you never know which way's out when you get into one of those glass enclosures.
Yeah.
So that sounds really interesting, because you needed to create a geographical world, or like the place that the action was having, that was as interesting as in your first book.
Yeah.
So are there any other rules of your genre that you like or don't like, or that are really important?
I don't know, you just see so many, like chosen ones.
Yes, they've got chosen ones in this as well.
And, my character's not, she is a chosen one, but she's one of many chosen ones, right? She has a special ability, but she's not the only one with that ability. So that was kind of important just to distinguish her that way.
Yeah.
Like, she wasn't Harry Potter, she's not gonna kill Voldemort or whatever.
Mhm. So have you found any of the rules limiting for your
No,
genre?
not really, even though you have to follow the rules, you can still break them, that's,
Yeah.
like, the rules are there and you should follow them, but, it's okay to break them sometimes too. I
Yeah.
took a
I mean,
photography class and, we were supposed to take pictures of an egg and she gave us these rules, right, of this egg. And like, I couldn't think of a way to come up creative. But then we got back to class, she said, well, you didn't have to follow the rules. I'm a rule follower, right? So it's like, so everybody else has all these pictures of their egg dressed up and colored and whatever, and not me.
I was in a group as well where we were all put into teams and we were supposed to find a coin with a certain year on it. And the group that won, or we had to have a picture. It said you had to take a picture. They didn't say take a picture. You just had to have a picture of a coin. They went online and got one because no one had a 1922 penny or something like that. Well, it couldn't have been a penny because we don't even have them in Canada anymore.
No, not anymore.
But yeah, you have to think outside of the rules to create something unique at times.
Mhm.
And so, how about you, Scott, in your genre? Because you're looking at children's books right now.
yeah. The thing is, what I'm after the children's books, I have that long fantasy story,
Mhm.
and this is what I've been thinking about in the background. Is a big question is, the main character I'm thinking about does not have a happy ending. So it's more like a tragedy in a way.
Mhm.
And it's basically about how following the path of domination and hatred leads to destruction. So how do you do that and make the character relatable, but it's more like you empathize, but you see where he went wrong?
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. Again, the Game of Thrones does that well. And so part of and that's what we're doing with this club, that in reading other books, you can see how other people who got their books out who you might admire, how did they deal with that? And so you can learn some lessons. And I know that sometimes with writers, they're afraid to read because they're worried about being influenced. But in every other art, the worst thing to do is to isolate, because you learn so much from people who've gone before. Like imagine someone decides they're not going to practice, and if they play the flute and they're not going to, or they're a songwriter, they're not going to play like Beethoven's songs or whatever that help them develop their dexterity and whatever. It doesn't work there, and it certainly doesn't work in writing. That where you're thinking, oh, I'm wondering how I can do it. That if you look at how others do it, you can think, oh, wow, that's so amazing. I never thought of that. And you'll still find your unique way of doing it because your characters are different from that one anyway. So it's not like you're going to cookie cutter take that and put it on yours.
Or you can look at it another way. You can see what they're doing and think, oh, I don't like that. If I was writing that story, I would do this instead.
Yeah.
And take it another way, right? So it's still influencing you, but it's
Yeah, it's like I always joke about, you have to know the rules before you can break them.
Exactly. And in writing, you see mashups like a thriller romance and stuff like that. But the whole thing is that the reason that a book like this is done well is because he knows who he's writing for one thing. He's told a great story and they got kind of what they're expecting. Because if you put in too much of the wrong of something that turns your readers off, that's important to know as well. So, so it's really important, like where you're doing a mashup of different genres, that you consider that readers have come with expectations and you want to shake things up, but you also don't want to disappoint. But it's your story ultimately, and your story will attract readers, but also it's a two-way thing. You don't want to necessarily, especially in the beginning stages, put readers off by, they read, like for example, if in this book, which was hard to get into, had it got someplace and you're just thinking, well, that is too weird for me, you to put it down. But it was worth keeping up and keeping with the, giving the grace to this author, knowing that, okay, I know it's often hard, I'm going to learn these things and keep with it, because then when the action picked up, you're right in there with him. So it's a two-way thing, because of course, as a writer, you're writing your story. Then the place of an editor is to help you bridge that gap, because if no one's getting it, then you might not have an audience for your book. And if that's more for some, sometimes the reason you're writing it is because you just want to write the story and you're not so worried about the readers. But at some point, most writers want there to be an audience for their story. And so that's how the rules, I don't think the rules tend to trap you, but they help give you and they connect you with an audience, because you think, yeah, this is it. I mean, and as authors, we're readers as well. And you just think of the stories that you really loved, like, and like for instance, one of my favorite is Breathing Lessons by Ann Tyler. And it is a story of an older couple who fall in love again over a weekend. So the timeline of the book is really short. It's just, 48 hours or so. The rules of romance is that it's a happy ending, and you got that. And it's just such a satisfying read that was, well, her book was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. So there was enough in there, there's enough space to play even within rules. So if you want to, like Evan Winters has in The Rage of Tigers, attract readers, then understanding the rules of your genre and doing it well are certainly key. So I'm going to wrap up our meeting today around The Rage of Tigers and the book club. And thank you. I'm going to send this recording to those who couldn't make it today. And next week, we'll be talking more about how he published it, because he self-published it and then it was taken up by traditional publishing. So we'll talk a bit about his publishing choices, because we're studying this book, and then how they apply to you.
Okay.
Thanks. And I think I have a little closing slide for this, or do I? Oh yes, I do. Thank goodness I remembered, because it is too cool. Watch this. Where is it? I can't find it. Oh, there it is. There it is. There we go.
That's so neat.